Well, I think we'll begin. Welcome, everybody. I'm very pleased to see you here at the Civic and Moral Education Initiative seminar, which is a whole series of seminars we have quite regularly on issues around civic and moral education and civic and moral issues generally. My name's Helen Haste, and this year I'm coordinating the programme. And I'm delighted to introduce my very good friend, Daniel Bar-Tal, who I've known for really quite a long time. He is currently a professor of psychology at Tel Aviv University, but he's actually this year a visiting scholar at Brandeis. So I think it's a very regular connection to Brandeis that Danny has. He comes quite frequently. I got to know Danny, first of all, through the very interesting international organisation called the International Society for Political Psychology. Danny has been very actively involved in ISPP for many years, as has also Herb Kellman. We're very welcome to Paris here. And in fact, Herb and Danny and also myself have at various points been presidents of this organisation, so we've long-standing connections there. Danny did his doctorate at the University of Pittsburgh, so he has had a considerable experience of being in the States, but subsequently he's been working for many, many years in Israel in a very interesting environment. The word interesting perhaps should be in inverted commas here. Interesting environment of contemporary Israel. And he's written some extremely interesting books around essentially a nation that is in a position of perceiving itself to be under siege, I think is the right description from your own writings. And so I'm extremely pleased that Danny was able to be here today and talk to us about his current thoughts in this area. The respondent to Danny will in fact be Shai Fuchsman. Shai is a doctoral student here, and Shai's committee is Bob Selman, myself, and Danny as an external reader. And Shai's work, as you will hear, very much closely connects with Danny's research, but particularly the context of education. So, Danny, sorry. Oh yes, I'm sorry. Paul Kuttner, who is our assistant, invaluable assistant on CME, I'd like to make an announcement. Yes.
Just quickly before we start, we have here an attendance sheet I'm going to pass around, so please put your name on it. If you'd also like to be on our mailing list, please put your email, and you can learn about. We have a lot of things going on online. There's a lot of other opportunities we pass around, as well as more events that I'm sure you'll be interested in. So please put your name no matter what. Put your email if you'd like to be on the list. And there are snacks over here, so please feel free to grab some.
Thank you, Paul. Okay. A pen.
Here's one.
Oh, he got one. Looks like there is one.
Okay, so are we ready to start?
Yeah. So someone asked me before the meeting, how many people do you expect? I said at least 2, and it will be enough. So I am glad, when there are this number of people. I feel that usually it's a very friendly audience, so we can do it much more informally than usually this type of talks go on, and engage maybe later in a more fruitful discussion about a place which very often figures in the headlines of the world news. And I would like really to share with you some of my thoughts, observations, research about a specific topic. It's a topic about occupation, where it's part of my larger interest. I study in general conflicts, but obviously being an Israeli, I cannot overlook the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is the center of much of my research. And then we started about 5 years ago a project that focuses on occupation. I have to say that when I looked through the Google on the story of the occupation, there are not many Israelis that deal with occupation. There are a number of them, but not really many. Conflict obviously is a very important topic, but occupation not. But we started to deal with this about 5 years ago. You see here a number of people that are working in this particular project. So it has two directions. And I will, in fact, I must admit, a relatively provocative teaser in order to kind of stimulate interest. But this particular direction, I am going only to touch very briefly, and will tell you that we completed a large-scale project together with Itzhak Schnell. He's a political geographer, and we completed to edit a book which will be called The Effects of Occupation on the Occupying Society. And it's finished, the papers are, and we are negotiating now to publish it in Hebrew and in English. And I expect that it will stir a lot of debate, and the particular quote fits beautifully into the book that, as I said, will come out hopefully within months. But I will talk with you mostly about projects that these people are involved. I will touch a little bit on this one, and those are a group of my doctoral, ex-doctoral students. Some of them already are professors, and the questions that we pose to ourselves is obviously how psychologically society members cope with the notion of occupation, prolonged occupation. So my talk will be divided to a number of parts. I will first start a little bit with legal approach, because you cannot talk about occupation without touching some of the legal aspects, and then I will dive into psychology of the problem, and then we'll share with you some of the research that we did about this topic, and then we'll go beyond, as I promised in my teaser. So we have a long program, and let's see. So first we have to go into legal arena, and legal arena is the one that defines what is occupation and what is prolonged occupation. And interestingly, when you look on this legal arena, you find a number of Israelis, in fact, who worked on this topic. Eyal Ben-Venishti, who is from law school at the Tel Aviv University, is one of the experts on occupation. He wrote one of the seminal books, and he defined occupation in this way, and I obviously will not read to you, but he is the one that provided the framework how to look, because occupation is a phenomenon that still exists, if I can remind. So it's not only Israel that occupies with all the ramifications that it has and disagreements, because you know Israel does not consider holding the territory of the West Bank as occupation, but because consider that those are land under dispute. In contrast, in fact, there are other states that consider it as occupation, but we have also occupation of Cyprus, and occupation of Tibet, and obviously of occupation of Iraq, to remind people here, and Afghanistan. There are some other, but I would like immediately to say that they differ, very much. For example, part of occupation of Cyprus is really well accepted by the Turkish population, by Turkish patriots. So there are different shades of occupation, but still this will be the definitions that will apply, right? But the story is what is happening with prolonged occupation. So occupation do take place, and for long, obviously, period of times. It's part of the political arena, warfare arena. But the question is, what does happen when prolonged occupation is lasting more than 5 years? And there are different definitions. What is prolonged occupation? And usually it is considered more than 5 years, even when military hostilities cease, which means that we may speak about Iraq, but still the military activities are going on, but they stop, finish, and they still occupation is continuing. We have now, obviously, if it is prolonged, the activities end and the occupier is continuing to be there. The question is obviously is raised: what are the intentions of the occupier, and whether he would like to take the territory or not is an important question that is raised. What are the intentions? Now, from another different angle, which is again related very much to the story of legality, is what are the obligations of the occupying power vis-a-vis the occupied society. And with regard to this process or act, there are very clear, really legal rules how the occupying power should behave, and we have Geneva and Hague conventions that really regulate the behavior and say what is allowed and what is not allowed. And for example, it says that occupier is responsible to protect the territory and the right of the occupied population. And it also says that really is not allowed to move the population of the occupying society into the occupied society. And as I said, there are, for example, the First Geneva Convention says that prohibits occupying state from transferring civilians from its territory to the occupied territory. And then we have Hague regulations, which came as well. So there are really clear rules how the occupying power should behave. I want just to tell you that, since my case, as you can understand, will be the Israeli case, and I will talk about it from a very different angle, but I want just to enlighten you. I don't know how many of you know that it was a question in Israel, what to do. I will give you two important pieces of information. One was that in 1967, the legal advisor to the Minister of Education, his name is Merom, Theodor Merom, a very known judge, I think that later he left Israel, and he issued an opinion that Israel is not allowed to settle the territories because they should be occupied, considered as occupied territory is not allowed. This became a state secret, and only is a document popped out later in 2000, I think. And today you can get the document, in fact, in Google. So easy, no problem. But at that time, obviously, it was secret and nobody was allowed to see. And then another important ruling was by Shamgar, who was Attorney General in Israel. An Attorney General of Israel, Shamgar, very well-respected legal scholar who came from the army, really. And he said that he ruled out that although the particular case does not apply to the normal case of occupation, Israel is obliged to really behave according to the rules of Hague and Geneva. It was in 1968, but 1968 is so many years ago, so obviously only in the first years to some extent they guarded it, and then obviously it changed dramatically, and this particular recommendation or ruling is not anymore intact, as we will see. Now, what I would like to say is now moving slowly into the arena where I feel much comfortable, because when we talk about the legal issues, I am not, it's not my expertise. So if we move to more psychology of this, as I said before, obviously there are different types of occupation, and as we all know, some of the cases, the occupying forces are even really well received by the occupiers. As I said, example, if you part of the population of Cyprus accepted Turks very, very, very well, and this happened. But I want to talk about cases when, in cases when the occupation is forceful and the occupied society really does not want to be occupied, and the occupation does take place. So in these cases, there is very soon a confrontation between the occupying forces and the occupied, and this is probably a very, I would say, natural rule, if you want, axiom, if you want, but this is what happens in all the places that we can only think about them, right? So, occupation itself is, as an act, is not accepted by the occupied society, and then what we see is that immediately some type of resistance appears. Doesn't matter where, you know, but this is a rule that it can begin either violence, it can begin non-violence, but there will be some kind of resistance. But immediately, which is also very natural, when these acts of resistance appear, it's very clear that the occupying force perceives them as threatening to the occupation, to the goals, to the intentions, to the military forces, and obviously in order to prevent the occupier must use some violent means to enforce its objective in order to enforce occupation. So those are rules that we all understand, but maybe some people don't, but it's very, very clear that it has to happen. Now, another point that I have to frame it because it's very important, that we are in 2010, but if, you know, obviously it's already 4 years, occupation is viewed very differently by the international community than it was viewed, I don't want to say 200 years, which was viewed, but even obviously in the decades, there is a change in the international community, public opinion, and it must be very, very clear that, that usually what I say is the following, that if some forces occupy another state, another society, they have to have a very, very well elaborated rationale in order to do it, as in the present time. And we can think as a good example will be what pains to some extent Bush administration went in order to get support of the international community in order to enter Iraq and eventually enter, which means that it does mean that maybe under certain circumstances, obviously certain superpowers still consider themselves that they are above the law and can do whatever they want. Russia in Georgia was another case, China obviously in Tibet, but it's from 1950s. But usually other groups have to think what will be the implications. Now, I want to say that in principle, the story is that when we talk about long-term occupation, it contradicts international rules and values, contradicts democratic societal beliefs, which means it really undermines very much the essence of the democratic state, because by definition, it eventually will have to treat part of other population not democratically and violate basic human rights, which is, was based on what I said before. There will be resistance. They will have to do certain acts in order to contain the resistance, and this act by nature will violate human rights. And what I would like to talk, and this is something that it comes to me relatively easily, because as a social psychologist, we have to understand the long-term occupation will contradict certain personal moral standards, assuming that in our days we all go through some kind of system of socialization. We are learned, this will be the area of Helen, right? Moral standards that we acquire, and we know what is right and what is wrong. And obviously, we have to deal with this type of situation when behavior of our group will contradict what we think certain moral standards, right? So what are the implications of occupation? So what, if I would like to summarize, when we say occupation, what does it bring into our mind? and I did such a small study asking people in Israel, general occupation, but you will learn later that it does not ring the right bell, the other bell it rings. So people will tell you that there is inherent conflict of interest between occupier and occupied, and it is context that is usually characterized by violence, which will appear, and it reflects in many respects wrongdoing, injustice, immorality, which have to follow when we talk, and it involves usually large degree of empathy towards the occupied and the negative attitudes towards the occupier. Those will be very simple principle of occupation. Okay? And there is some kind of expectation that the situation is temporary and will be terminated. So we don't even today think about the occupation of Tibet. It still is issue. Some expectation, also it's clear. I would be very surprised if it will end. But still, people talk about it, still it's issues that is going on. Okay, so now let's go and jump into psychology, which is the core of my talk. So what are the challenges for the occupying society? And I would like to go into the heart of social psychology, and to propose one assumption that is based on two legs, really. My basic assumption is that society members of the occupying society. Society members, but to some extent you have to look what happens in Iraq, what happens in Afghanistan, have to deal with this situation on the basis of what I proposed before. That occupation is negatively perceived, right? And we have some kind of acquired sense what is right and what is wrong. And we have to deal with this as human beings. We always deal on interpersonal level, personal level, intergroup level, and obviously international level. So we feel some kind of cognitive dissonance that on the one hand, we as human beings, members of the society, would like to maintain positive image of being right. And we have to know, which is, I will not enter into this arena, but I believe that at least we know that part of our self-perception derives from our membership in a group. So Dani Bar-Tal is not only Dani Bar-Tal, Dani Bar-Tal is also Israeli. And as Israeli, as a Jew, obviously takes some kind of responsibility by what Jews do and what Israelis do. And it's part of us, it's very human. And we know, from the fantastic work, obviously, by Tashfel and all what followed after that. And then, from completely different ground, there is also from what we call moral development, so it would be more connected to your work, Helen, and other people in this university. We all remember Kohlberg, obviously, and other. Selman, to some extent, will be related. So we have some kind of self-perception on actual self, ideal self, how we should behave, again, as members, because it's part of us, and there is this discrepancy between what is happening and what should be as a kind of ideal self. So what I want to propose on this level, so occupation should cause to some psychological problems to the occupying society. Yeah? Reasonable? Will you go with this until now? Okay. So now I would like to propose and say that if we go with this reasoning, I would like to propose that members of a society, and what I am proposing at the moment is universal. It's not a specific case of the Israeli society, but my proposal is that if there is this dissonance or this discrepancy, right, people have to find some kind of psychological solution, as we all have to do when we face dissonance, right? So, what will be one possibility? It is possible that some people will look at the situation, define it as occupation, and therefore will fight against occupation. And I know that people in the United States, for example, who fight against the occupation of Iran and express their views, and they signed petitions, and they wrote articles, and they met, etc., etc. And in Israel also, some people faced the situation and they labeled it as occupation, felt uncomfortable with this, because it, as I say, will not repeat the story, and will find. But on the other hand, all or part of the society may be convinced in the necessity of the occupation for achieving higher values and goals, which means that they will say, yes, it's occupation. But it's very, very important, because Iraq has mass destruction weapon, and we have to save Iraqis in order to be democrats. So it's very important what we are doing, or taking Afghanistan, because otherwise we cannot prevent another bombing in New York. So there are important goals and values that we do recognize that it is occupation, but these reasons explain, and we can live comfortable, as again with other cases of dissonance that we may experience. But some other people, which I would like to propose, really we have to develop various ways of coping with such a situation. And here will be the rest of my talk, how people, part of the talk, how people cope psychologically with this way. So now I would like to turn into the case of Israeli occupation, and it's ugly, very ugly. If you want, you don't have to know, you can live in Tel Aviv, 20, 30 kilometers from the occupation, and live very comfortably. And Israelis live very comfortably with the situation, as you know. But if you really are interested what is going 30, 40 kilometers from Tel Aviv, and you either visit, like Women of Mahsom Watch, or you enter into internet, or you read press even, you will find that it is very ugly. So this will be our case. So the Israeli case. So how did the Israeli Jews define the Israeli control of the territories after the Six-Day War? So one way to look, and some Israelis wrote, is that it is liberated territories. And you will ask me how. So I'll tell you an anecdote. Tom Segev wrote a very nice book, 1967, so describes the process of what was going on. And he describes the following real story, that the chief of staff was meeting with the defense minister Moshe Dayan, and they had weekly meeting, and there was a list of issues that they were supposed to deal with. And on the agenda it was written, occurrences in the occupied territory. It was in late June 1967. And then, the way that it's written in the book, a hidden hand erased the word occupied and wrote liberated. So it was written, occurrences in liberated territories. And this is a nice anecdote, but it expresses very well the sentiment that was going on. So are there liberated territories under dispute that formally are presented in this way, or those are occupied territories? Now, so I want to give you one example. Haaretz is considered one of the liberal, probably the liberal newspaper. It's our Israeli New York Times. But I want you to read a piece that Haaretz wrote on June 8 in 1967. And since, unfortunately my age is the size that I was at that time an officer in the Israeli army, so I would be able to describe to you the feeling, the glorification, the if you want, even the history that was going at that time with this war, conquest, where people felt that really the next kingdom, some of them, of Israel began, and this was what they wrote at that time, expressed to a large extent the general feeling of Israel. So this land is liberated, it is ours, and very important. Now, just for your knowledge, on September 22nd, 1967, 57 leading political, cultural, and intellectual figures founded an organization of the Greater Israel, what we call Eretz Israel Hashlema. And among the supporters, you would find the leading writers, leading directors, ex-politicians, really very important figures sign this. But this is the original letters that they signed. But what is somewhat paradoxical, if you want, that on the same day, 12 relatively very marginal figures issued declaration calling for Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories. And Avneri, if someone knows the names of the people, Avneri was one of them, that signed. But obviously, nobody heard about the second one. Everybody heard about the first one. So what if we will move to public opinion? What public opinion thought? So if I look, 1966, 1973, great majority of the Israelis objected to any type of withdrawal from the West Bank. And you can see some numbers that it was beyond consensual view, 90-85% is very high, and it was maintained up to late 70s. So only with the coming of Sadat, it changed somewhat. So for the first almost 10 years, there was an absolute consensus that this land should be an Israeli land. And I can show you formal reflection of it. So you have three maps here. One is even of Hebrew University, where the border, what we call the green line, disappeared. And if you want to understand a little bit, I am already jumping into 2010, what is going on in Israel, if you want to have a glimpse of understanding, look at these maps and think about people that are voters today. They were born, things that, let's say, were born in 1967, so 40 years old. They were reared up in this type of setting, environment, culture, where it is clear that this land is part of Israel. So try to convince them that now they have to give back something that they believe is part of their land. And you have former governmental and Minister of Education met, and you can see just an example. So how do society members cope with these psychological challenges? I would like to start with moving into psychoanalytic arena, which I am not very expert. Just heard a lot about it in the conference that I was in Susan about psychology of genocide. So I borrowed some of the material from them. So one mechanism is repression, right? Which means that obviously when I have to deal with, what I have to deal with this threatening information which impinges on my self-perception, which it will remain in unconscious. So, for example, I would say no occupation. If it's not occupation, it's easy, so I can deal with it. Denial will be another mechanism. So you have to hear definition, and all of them. And this is, the idea does not hurt innocent people. And you will ask people on the street, this will be the response. I believe of 80-90% of the Israelis will tell you that, I will give you an example that I can, Israelis believe that, and it's stated explicitly time after time by the prime minister, by the president. So Israeli army is the most moral army in the world, and it is well believed. And I can tell you just one. I just must, jump and tell you in order so you will not be surprised, because this issue I now started in a project to study. But think about one thing that you don't understand, or some people may not understand. When I say the army, because of the ways that the Israeli army is structured, it says something about me, everyone. So you American can easily say American army and be very, very remote or very far from you, because you may not know any soldier, you don't know any officer, and you can speak, really negatively about the Israeli army. When I say something about negative thing about army, I'm speaking about my children. I'm speaking about my neighbors. I'm speaking about my friends. I'm speaking about my students. This is the Israeli army. So you have to understand this aspect, which as I said, I started now a line of research that explains a lot, So to really say Israeli army, everybody goes, it's mandatory, your children go, and they go then up to the age of 40. This is Israeli army. So it's not surprising that people don't want to view the army in a negative way, because it immediately impinges on me, which means that I did not rear properly my child if he misbehaved, right? Avoidance, it's another example, and you find it a lot, which means that people just take a distance. People don't read anyone that follows closely, Gidon Levy or Amir Haas. They don't want to hear about these journalists that bring you bad news. So this is very well, I have many personal friends that stopped reading press or stopped reading particular information. They don't want to know what is going on. We have projection, which goes very often, which you will hear Palestinians do not value human life all the time, projecting to the other. And you have intellectualization, rationalization. The best will be what Abba Eben said, the Palestinians have never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Everybody loves it, repeats it after time and time, and obviously it's can be said absolutely the same about Israelis, anyone, etc. So now, after presenting to you something from the angle of psychoanalysis, I want to jump into fields into domains that I feel much more comfortable, and this is social psychology. This is my own work. So I want to say that there are bolstering beliefs or buffering beliefs that allow you to deal with the situation in Israel, and I will show you societal beliefs, justifications of the occupation, which you will find a lot. Occupation provides security, it's a bargain chip, and they describe reasons for continuing occupation. You will find it widely shared by the population in Israel, so people will be able to justify. Now we'll tell you about Hamas, we'll tell you all kind of various rationales that are well accepted. Then we have referring to the delegitimization of the Palestinians, which is widely shared. I myself wrote a book, published in 2005, about Arab representation in the Israeli society. It's 400 pages of documentation how Israeli society, Jewish society, perceives Palestinians. And you have a number of these examples, but it goes on. And I would tell you even that it goes in worse direction. So if, it's part. So societies may have very derogating, legitimizing beliefs about another group. But what is today very striking, that they became normative. which means the minister can talk about this, prime minister can, no problem, you can write. Nobody, here, as you know, if someone will dare to say negatively about Jews or negatively about blacks, will be next morning fired, and I saw it even in the 2 months that I was here already, 3 cases. In Israel, on contrary, even mayor of Lod will say something negative about Arabs, he will get more points. So the culture is as such that encourages this type of views. And another one is obviously self-image, which is differentiation, we and they, and obviously, as I said, Jews perceive themselves very positively. And if I may share something with you, which is simultaneous, I just finished to supervise a thesis, eventually we write it, where we now go into younger age, into kindergarten, in order to see how does it develop, because when you go to adults, obviously it's something different, and we find so the seeds are planted there in the kindergartens, and we will hear a lot from Shai from his dissertation about adolescence, which is another obviously period. But now I finish a large study of children, 5 years, 6 years old, and they profess these 3 beliefs: justification of goals, complete delegitimization of Arabs, complete self-glorification of which means what you see. Just will give you an example. What was written by Keynan? I don't know who knows who is Keynan. Keynan today is really one of the pacifists, but what did he write in 1967 about occupation? So again, returning to this time, we are going to see, what is the image. He himself today is on different side, but this is the way that he wrote in June 23, 1967. And as I say, Ehud Olmert, Shimon Peres, and recently I heard our chief of staff with the same statement, which is propagated again and again about most moral military force in the world. Now, let's go a little bit and see data. So, and see what we'll do later. Here, so we decided to do a study. And the question was very interesting. We are in 2007, and the questions that we wanted to ask, do in 2007 still people think that it's liberated territory? I don't know. I mean, in my circle where I move, obviously no one. But what is going on with general population? So here is a distribution, and this is the response. So what we are going to find is that some people claim that the control of Israel over the West Bank is occupation. To what extent do you accept this claim? And you are going to see that 52% do not accept this claim, which means look how it is distributed. So great majority of Israelis believe, so still continue to believe, that the land is not occupied.
Well, what's the variable?
It's a variable here.
Horizontal variable?
Well, it's probably a Likert scale of some sort, right? Like
It's a Likert scale, right? So you have from 5 to 5 to 1.
6 to 1.
5 to 1.
6.2.
6 to 1, yeah. So what does it mean really? Look some of the results. Right, 1 to 6. So what you see is that with age, you accept more that it's occupation, income, higher classes. Militarism is very much related, religiosity obviously, hawkishness, no surprise, but then feelings of threat from Arabs, tendency to discriminate. Israel is very much related, so you see, if you want, some kind of syndrome. And then shame and guilt, right? The more you believe it's occupation, the more shame you feel, the more guilt you feel. And what is interesting, and this is a number, and this is a very revealing, oh now I can use my So what you see that support for compromise based on 1967 border, you are going to find so the correlation is, you see, very high. So which means the perception of the situation of the occupation is very much related to your obviously willingness to end the occupation. So it's really one of the conditions, right? I will not go over this. So what we learned from here is that the story of perceiving this land as liberated is probably one of the psychological obstacles to settle. And I can tell you some additional data. We just finished to analyze speeches of the leaders and the platform of the parties between 1967 up to the last election. Wanted to see what is the perception in the political echelon. What do they think about the area? What do they? And I have to say, to tell you, to share with you, that I was, I would say, surprised, but it's disappointed. I really was not aware until the study was done. We picked up all these platforms that were easy to get, all speeches of the leaders, and the story is very sad. In fact, almost except a very marginal minority that you will find on the left, which perceived the land as occupied, the mainstream of the political Israel, which means including Labour Party, obviously, views this land as being Jewish land. And if Labour Party is ready to compromise, is because it perceives that it is very costful to maintain these territories. So even Labour Party in the platform will say the following: you know, we do recognize that it is our land and it belongs to us. But we do realize that in order for Israel to solve the problem, it has to divide the land. Not talking about Likud, which is a major force today, etc. You know, where the basic assumption is that it's our and exclusively ours. So this is one of the angles. Obviously, it does not explain everything, but it explains, in my opinion, a lot if you want to understand the Israeli positions with regard to the solution of the conflict. I wonder what to do now, if you want, because I am now ready to move to somewhat offspring of the talk. But I wanted to show you, I mean, if people are here interested, I wanted to show you some of the costs of the occupation. Are you interested to see? Yeah. That I collected. It was very difficult to find this data. But the point is that when occupation is unaccepted and resisted by the occupied society, it leads to ongoing confrontation, violence, oppression, dominance, exploitation, and it has a very serious consequences. So I want to show you what are some of the consequences, and I have to tell you that it was very difficult to collect. There is no data in no place that puts together everything, what did happen between 1967 and 2010. No. But I, with the help of a very, very skillful assistant, we try to collect some of the data. And I want to show you what are the prices. So you should know information, you know what we're talking about. So this is the number of Palestinians that live, just so you will have a framework and to compare what we're talking about, the size of the area, number of population, and it's taken from CIA. So you know, so there is an ongoing debate how many Palestinians are living in, but you know, so I will skip it, you know, there are different demographers, but this is from CIA. Okay, so at the same time, we have 313,000 Jewish Israelis living in the West Bank, in addition to 197 living in East Jerusalem. So it gives you also some kind of perspective what we're talking about, when there will be a need to evacuate. Evacuation probably we're speaking about moving 100,000 only, because there's about 200,000 live of eventually everybody predicts this land will be swapped, and we're talking so now let's go and see what is going on. So I don't have to read, I will just show you, but this is information that we eventually found, and B'Tselem was very helpful. It's an Israeli NGO that collects a lot of information. It's very much delegitimized in Israel because of what it does. So Israel has expropriated about 50% of the land from West Bank. By March, there were over 120 settlements and about 100 outposts. I would like to say that the outposts are illegal from the point of view of Israel, that you should know. Illegal from the point of, and Israel promised in the roadmap, right? Her in roadmap on Napoli that it will dismantle the outposts. I cannot remember. In one of them, which obviously didn't do and will not do, and anyone who believes that something will happen is right. Now, casualties. It's almost impossible to find how many Palestinians were killed, but this is what we found. Between 1989 to 2000, about 7,000 Palestinians were killed. Minors, imprisonment, about, listen to the staggering number, about 700,000 Palestinians were imprisoned either once or two times, at least once. So we're talking about a number that is unbelievable. When I said this number in Israel, once in my talk, there was a silence for about a minute. People could not believe, those are the numbers. 150,000 were tried in the military courts. At the end, which is a formal number, how many Palestinians are held by the Israeli forces, and there is also about several hundreds what we call administrative detention, which means that no accusations are filed, they were not tried, but this is administrative detention. 24,000 houses were demolished, leaving 70,000 Palestinians homeless. At the moment, there are 504 movement obstacles, and I want to tell you, I did some investigation about it. It's so some of them, the only purpose is to humiliate Palestinians. No purpose whatsoever. Closing certain roads, entrances to villages, no purpose. Except, there are some on the Green Line, which is a different story. There are 61 of them, etc. But many of them have one goal: make life. And I saw them with my eyes, so I was there. No explanation why. Sometimes they are taken off, then put again. Just to. Now, obviously, Israelis also paid a price. Between 1967 to 1999, 987 people were killed. It's a formal number by Israeli Foreign Office. We don't have later some of the numbers. Between 1989 to 2009, I cannot find one number. It's different accounts are going on. Very difficult to find. So 1,400 Israelis were killed, 139 minors, 488 of those killed were security personnel, and 99.5 were civilians. Between September, which means when 29, what we call Second Intifada began, you can see most of the people who were killed, Israelis who were killed, they were killed with the beginning of the Intifada. So if I will deduce 300 between 1989 to 2000, and the staggering number was after the beginning of the Intifada. And suicide attacks, so 24, it's an Israeli International Heritage Commemoration Center, counted 24 1,000 attacks. But you know, those are of different kind. But what is unbelievable is that only 0.54%, less than 1%, were suicide attacks, but this one were responsible for about 50% of the fatalities. So obviously suicide attacks are the most. And then we have what we call this mortar attacks, etc. So I will just finish, something. If I reach this point, so I will say the following: that it throws us into completely different topics. That I said the book that will be out will deal with them. But what I want to say is that the attempts to continue occupation against the will of the occupied society require development and use of rationales that lead often to immoral practices by the occupying society. And I will have to explain what does it mean when you reduce your guilt, shame, to what kind of acts it leads. And obviously the attempt to uphold the resisted occupation by the occupied society lead often to the disproportional and immoral means to suppress the resistance by the occupying society. It's a whole rationale because it goes. And what I say is that my point is that it does not stop at the border. If someone thinks that the practices will stop on the green line, he doesn't know what he's talking about. They have to move forward into Israel inside, and they have tremendous effect on political life, societal life, legal life, economic, cultural domains, and we documented in this book what is going on, what kind of price Israel is paying as a result of this. There is, and here is a strong statement that was a kind of teaser, that eventually society that violates principles of justice, morality, and human rights is condemned to a deterioration, degeneration of democratic, human, and moral qualities, and this is what we witness in Israel today. So it's a very, I am bringing very sad news to you, and it's not an accident that one of the most hawkish figures in political life said what is said here. And I could bring you another quotation, but our past Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, that has even stronger statement about occupation. And as you follow his career now, which is unfortunate that what he could do, did not do, but now he speaks, he exactly points to the, hits to the point that Israel is paying very, very heavy price. And it was one of the, obviously, his motivation to change the situation in Israel. So, what I would like to summarize, defining situation as occupation may speed up its termination. It's a first step towards moving. And then dissemination of reliable and comprehensive data about what is happening. What I brought to you, you are going to find, I predict 90% of the Israelis don't know what is going on in the territories, and significant reduction of the use of psychological coping mechanism may bring about erosion in public support of the occupation. So those are important missions for social psychologists, but I have to tell you now, so how to do, how to carry them, it's very difficult. I don't know really. Thank you for listening.
A lot of his work and interview Israeli students, high school students, adolescents, to find out to what extent do they adhere to what you call the ethos of conflict, or these societal beliefs that exist in Israel's society. And one question that actually you advised me to include in my interview protocol was asking students a similar question to what you asked, which is, are the territories occupied or liberated?
High school.
High school students.
Because students, they may think of the university.
Yeah, 10th grade students. And I actually, because they were students, I helped them understand the difference between the two terms. I said occupation, meaning the land belongs to someone else and we occupied it, versus liberation, which means the land belonged to us in the first place and we came and we liberated it. An interesting observation that I noticed with that answer, and I don't know if this came up with for you too, is the word in Hebrew, occupation, kibush, can be translated back into English in one of two forms. One is occupation, and the other one is conquer, which means more broadly, which has a different definition. It conquer. You think about first of all permanent change, and one of the things that students told me was it is occupation using the Hebrew word, which could also mean conquer. But that's okay. Occupation is fine. In fact, most countries have defined their border based on occupation. Any country, most countries occupy their land. Whether it's the British, the colonists who came here, took it in Europe. All the borders are defined by different conquests that happened throughout history. So yes, it's occupation. We took it. Now the Arabs need to get over it. We need to move on. It's ours. We took it. It's done. And they're also. And in fact, I had one of the students from religious school even point out to me that even the Hebrew Bible, there's a story of when the Jews came out of Egypt and into the Promised Land, God shepherded them into conquering the different parts of Israel. And the word that they use in the Hebrew Bible, kibush, is the same word as occupation. So even the Bible shows that God not only allowed it, but promoted occupation in a sense. And so he said, so why are we making a big deal of it now? When God allowed it, why can we do it now? So it was a type of justification by realizing that there is an occupation. And another kind of justification also, one of the last points you made, is a lot of Israelis don't know what's going on. They don't know the full picture that you described, but there is a sense among at least high school students that they're suffering in the territories, but they oftentimes blame the Palestinians for their own suffering. So yes, the Palestinians are suffering in Gaza, but it's because of Hamas, not because of what we're doing to them. Even if they acknowledge that it's Israel who's imposing or inflicting the pain, they're suffering. We're inflicting the pain because of what Hamas is doing. If Hamas stopped doing what they're doing to us, then the Palestinians will have a better life. So it's blaming the victim in a sense as one of the justifications. So those were just a couple of points where my study connected to some of the comments that you made. Then I have a couple of issues I want to raise and questions. One is, what is the role of the international community in changing this types of situation? And one thing I put it on the blog was, there's basically the carrots versus sticks approach. Do you punish Israel with sanctions, or do you incentivize? And the issue with the sticks approach is one thing I noticed in Israel. Anytime there's a major incident, for example, the most recent incident with the flotilla that came and tried to come into Gaza, is that as soon as the international community condemns Israel, the Israeli public opinion moves radically to the right and justifies it. And I could see in both informal and formal polling how people supported that action. And I think the fact that the international community condemned it helped gain support for that action in Israel. So given that there is no effective way of pressuring Israel to do it, how do you encourage Israel to end occupation? And the other point I wanted to make, given that we are in a school of education, and you come from a school of education, is what is the role of education? How can and that kind of ties obviously to my research, which is with children and with youth. How do we have them start thinking about perceiving the occupation in a different light, perceiving it as this is something wrong, perceiving it as this is something that needs to change? And specifically, how do we deal with two challenges? One is the psychological one that Danny talks about, which is the cognitive dissonance. How do you tell Israeli high school students or Israeli elementary students that being a citizen of this country is important, that you have to be proud of your flag, of your anthem, but at the same time that you need to acknowledge that we're doing this major wrongdoing to another nation. How do you deal with the collective guilt? And the second challenge is not only the psychological, but the political challenge. How do you, and I know this is something you've had experience with, how do you get the Minister of Education, or how do you access students in a way? Obviously there's the formal education. How do you get the Minister of Education to start, for example, just as a first step, change the map that you just showed to actually shade in the West Bank and Gaza in a different color in East Jerusalem? But also, what is the role of informal education or NGOs in beginning to change the dynamic, the psychological dynamics of that are continuing, are allowing occupation to continue. So those were the questions and comments that I had, and I'd like to open it up.
Thank you, Shai. When people speak, perhaps people say who you are, but we don't know everybody is, so could you announce who you are and speak? Yes.
My name's Ken Barney. I'm a local person who does some analysis, and I'm a Palestinian solidarity activist also. I'm a little confused by this talk, because maybe I misread the blurb advertising the talk, because I thought, and I might be biased by some of the really good things I've read in your articles, I thought you were going to be speaking more about this whole huge subject of fear, anxiety, victimization, eternal victimization, the elements of eternal victimization that maybe are based on reality, and the elements that are based on manipulation and exploitation of Holocaust memory. You've written about this quite a bit, and somehow when I read the blurb, I thought you were going to talk about that. And the talk that you gave, I think, is valuable for people that maybe don't have much information about this. For others of us, and there are probably some others in the room who are pretty well informed, this is, a lot of people, present this information. It may be valuable for people in the room, but I'm sorry to express my disappointment, but I hope you might say a few words about this subject that you've written about so well.
Okay. Maybe some more questions, So
Okay, let's collect some questions.
So we will, so I will
Yes.
be able.
Sure. Stu White, completely unaffiliated. Thank you for the fascinating talk. One of the things that I was immediately struck by is how much the sort of corrosive effects on the occupying society can be generalized to other occupying societies. Certainly the French occupation of Algeria, as an example, or the British occupation of Ireland, Southern Ireland, there were significant negative effects within the occupying society, and yet others, Hawaii, for instance, the American occupation of Hawaii, or Texas way back when, Tibet, as you mentioned, there seems to be almost no negative effects on the occupying society whatsoever. Are there some particular factors that seem to lead to or mitigate the negative effects?
Take the third question from this person who Jan has it.
Marvin Graham, I'm at the Harvard Divinity School. What you laid out here, like the costs to Israel in the broadest sense, we're not just talking about financial costs, but psychological costs, and the cost to the Palestinians, it seems to me that really makes a very good case for this solution of the two-state solution. It just seems to address a lot of that. It's like two people who just have not been able to work out a scheme to sort of like live together. And so they divorce. You take their half of the house, I'll take this half. When we have to speak, we speak. But other than that, we're sort of on our own. And it seems to do that like almost in one fell swoop. Because what it means is it's kind of disengaging from engaging which is damaging to both sides, psychologically and even deafening destruction.
Just address those three comments, Danny.
I'm sorry?
Address those three, yes.
Okay. I would try, I see a number of points, so that I will start maybe something sort of shy raise. First, you are right, about the international community, it's a very big question, and I do not want to raise, it's a standing question, can go on different levels, and I don't know. But with regard to education, you are right, the system of education in Israel does not provide, I'll tell you what, not the information, this is not the problem, but does not provide the tools with which you can later judge what is going on. For example, and what do I mean? You know, there is no discourse about human rights in Israel. I would say even on contrary. You know, I tend, you know, really entered into this topic and wanted that someone will write about it. Myself didn't have time, but collected a lot of information. You know, why is it happening that Israel does not deal with the issue of human rights to the extent that the gap between Israel and other countries where human rights is an important term, important value, you know, becomes a problem to the Israelis. An anecdote says that Israeli MKs, you know, members of Knesset, went to Brussels, and one of the Israeli MKs said to the Europeans, you know, we have so much in common, etc., etc. He wanted, against Arabs, he wanted. And the guy responded to him, we don't. You don't understand our language, which is true. I'm telling you, it's not an anecdote, it's a real story. Because you don't talk. Children in school don't learn about human rights. There is no discussion, nothing, you know, about human rights. And I can analyze, but it's a different talk, why this is the case, which has reasons. So the children even don't have tools so they can judge a situation and evaluate it because they don't, you know, they don't learn enough. You know, I will maybe enlighten some of you, there is a very orchestrated attack at the moment by the right and the government on civic education to the extent that the Minister of Education decided to reduce the number of hours to civic education, and then the claim is raised that the civic education in Israel is hijacked by the leftists and peaceniks, and it does not reflect the nationalistic values. And the present Minister of Education is really right-wing nationalistic. He brought people into the ministry, like the guy who we call it very important guy in terms of curricula, Tzvi Tzameret, Dr. Tzvi Tzameret, who is the head of the pedagogical secretariat, and boss, you know, this is the Minister of Education. And what you can do, you know, I mean, nothing. So this is responding to you. So the children don't, you know, they don't learn, they don't know how to judge. And I'll tell you, you know, as a kind of aside, since it's a kind of very informal and nice talk, you know, I changed, I think that you know this, the research questions that I raise in Israel. In fact, I do understand why Israelis are hawks. You know, there are very different reasons, demographic, and go see what is the socialization patterns, what are the indoctrination patterns, see the mobilized media, etc. So the question is different that I ask. How does it happen that a kid, you know, who went through the system, went to the army, and then one day opens his eyes? I think this is an interesting question, not the other one. And there are, you know, I see them, you saw them, you know, and the question is how? From home? No. You know, parents were hawks. So how did it happen that this guy suddenly is, let's say, demonstrating Sheikh Jarrah? I mean, unbelievable, you know, this is really unbelievable story. So the question has to be differently posed, because you understand, you know, if you don't, you know, you live very comfortable life in Israel, and if you don't want to face what is going on 30 kilometers, you can leave. Now, with regard to your question, I'm sorry to disappoint you, you know, that I didn't talk about this. It's a very, very large topic to some extent. I said before, Susan and I were in conference about psychology of genocide, and it was really part of the answers were provided there. But you know, in order to understand a little bit to some extent, one factor, very powerful factor, that is playing an important role in the ways that Israelis approach the conflict and obviously occupation is the feeling of threat, if you want, in the widest term, which is a constant built fear, which is perpetuated by the military echelon, by the politicians, by the media, by the educational curricula, all the time. Again, returning to this studies that I was mentioning, one part of this study was going to these 6-year-old children to learn what do they learn from the ways that they learn about Israeli national holidays, events. Hanukkah, you all know, Purim, Pesach, etc. And then Holocaust. And I will not probably tell you anything new, but what children learn is that Jewish people are continuously victimized. Because what is Hanukkah about? About the attempt to, what is Purim about? What is Pesach about? What is Day of Holocaust, Memorial Holocaust? And the children, learn. And as a result, when we ask them, what is their learning out of it? The learning is that there are people over there. One of the questions that we asked the children in the interview was, whether today there's the same situation. And they say, yes, today there is the same situation. The Jewish people are persecuted and other nations want to destroy, especially Arabs, want to destroy. So it begins at the age of 6. So this begins at the age of 6, and when you follow later what is going on, see the ceremonies, look at the speeches which I did of the Prime Minister and President on the Holocaust Memorial Day. This is what I call siege mentality. And it is, my daughter, who is 8 years old, I remember when she was in the 1st grade, came to me, and it was her. True, probably, the climate at home affects her. But when Pesach came, he said, Dad, you know what I learned? Look what they're telling me in the school. That there is a continuous attempt to exterminate Jewish people. Hanukkah and children, it was her understanding. That she kind of, look what they are telling me all the time. Is it true? Dad? Right. And it goes on. So within this context, obviously this is the most powerful factor that, like all the time they will tell you, that today's news, Hamas has anti-air missiles that are endangering Lod. This is today. This is what Prime Minister said yesterday. So all the time, we hear about the danger, and then I could, elaborate, which, what are the mechanisms, so the danger, giving you one, so the danger doesn't have place, that it can happen anywhere. Read, for example, the books by Appelfeld, who provide. It's continuous and constant danger to Jews. The relation between Holocaust and Arabs, another method, all the time. The misuse of the Holocaust in different contexts, that is very often used. Hitler is, Ahmadinejad is Hitler, etc., etc. So you can see another mechanism. So the ways that children are sent to the extermination camp, where you are talking about 200,000 youngsters move through what we call the journey of extermination. And so on. I could continue as you wanted another talk, how it is done. So the result is that Israelis, when I take my polls and go to them, I find that about 60% of the Israelis still believe that Holocaust can happen any day. And they are fearful that something would happen to them so this is the situation. And it is, and I can tell you now, you can ask whether it is used purposely or not purposely. This is the question. Or really they believe. So I can tell you, quote, which is an interesting quote by Ami Ayalon. He is an Israeli general and moved to be leftist. And he was the head of the Shabak, and then he was a general in the army, and now he became one of the leaders of the peace camp. And he once said, I witnessed it, was in Tel Aviv University, there was a general and the general was talking about threats that Israel is facing. And this guy got up and said the following. I am almost giving you word to word what he said. He said the following. He said, so you don't teach me how to threat the Israeli population. I am much better than you are, because in my long career in the security service, I did it over a long period of time and used all the tricks to do it. My goal was, he said, it's not only or not merely to frighten the Israeli population, but to get budgets. Very simple. He wanted big budgets for the army. So I had to threaten in order that the prime minister and treasury minister will give me the budget that I want. So I am expert of threatening the Israeli. This is what he said. So, take it as an anecdote or seriously as you want. But this is a story. And the last question that was raised about generalization of occupation. I do believe that the models that we present, and I have such, is general. Or in case that it is occupation that is not well accepted. In other words, if the occupation is, let's say, when you talk about occupation by Russian of this part of Georgia, that, Ostia is called, right? Where, there are mostly Russians who are very happy to be occupied by Russian, etc. But when occupation is unwanted, then I think that the system is the same system that it has. Now, it is multiplied when two factors are. One is that the distance is there is no distance, that it's part of it. So it's one factor. So when you go overseas, to Vietnam, it's a different story. But there was an effect, obviously. And a second factor, who is obviously determinative, is the one when you settle populations there. So when you move 500,000 of Jews over there, and you continue to raise the friction, then there is no doubt that there are processes, societal, military, let's take one factor, that is on the table, by the way. So the Israeli military have to maintain the occupation, right? They have to maintain occupation. They have to maintain occupation. They have to guard the settlements. And the roads, right? So now, and it was written in press, so I'm telling you something that is well accepted by Israelis. So it is not an accident that Israeli military performed very badly in what we call the Second Lebanese War, right? Why? Because the military were not prepared. They didn't, you have to be prepared for the war. But if you have the mission of being occupying force, you cannot prepare for big wars. And therefore, it was on the table, everybody talked about it, including the generals, that the Israeli army was unprepared as a one effect of occupation, which a lot will agree. But then when you go into other areas, then it's much difficult to exchange, to acknowledge it. When you find, for example, that 1/3 of the settlements were built on private Palestinian land, private, which means that it was illegal, and it was done by state, and it was approved by the Supreme Court, under pretext, which were liars. So you force the whole system to move into illegality. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but.
And it is maintained.
I know, but the question was, wouldn't the two-state solution address all
Yes,
these kinds of problems
definitely.
associated with occupation, or is that really too simplistic a view?
No, it's not. I mean, if there will be two-state, occupation will end. It will be end of the story. You know, there will be other stories, but this story will end. Occupation will end.
And there doesn't seem to be any other solution.
Right?
Can we have some more speakers? Can this gentleman
My
here.
question is just off that, so if you
With
want
your
other
name, sorry.
topics. I'm sorry, my name is Jesse, I'm a student at the ed school.
Yeah.
I don't really understand what you guys are talking about with the two-state solution solving things if both sides feel that it's their home. I mean, if you take my home from me and then say deal with it, I'm not going to be happy. And I feel like the way that you're saying that, at least on the Israel side, that they're raising children from the beginning to feel this way, then why would either side be happy with that situation?
Shall we take a couple of the other two comments as well? Stephen?
Well, this is different, so,
Oh.
but really in a way it's for shy.
So who are you?
Oh, my name's Stephen Brian Meisels. I guess I'm an alum here. I'm really interested in this question of the sort of moral compass that children and adolescents bring to this work. Having heard soldiers from the IDF talk about that dissonance and what happened to them, it would be really interesting to hear more about what both of you know about sort of people in Israel who were doing the work of progressive education in the face of this. This is very much a thing in the U.S. as well. People who are kind of moving against the tide of what the society says, but are really trying to be educators in the sense of creating these critical skills and creating spaces within their classrooms for children to be in pain and to try to figure it out. I'd love to hear more about that.
Shall we take those points?
This one, it's first you have to understand the Israeli system is very centralized. So it's not like here that Newton can go in one direction and water will go in another direction. It's very controlled, and then you have to understand human beings. So when comes an order, then most of the people don't want to get in trouble with ministry. And it goes to such extent that if a headmaster, principal, will issue a statement that will be, let's say, perceived as anti-Zionistic, he will be called by the minister to talk. I mean, so giving you an example, just recently, a real case, that a school was teaching history books developed by Dan Baron, where you have, it is a history book, that it has on one page the Palestinian narrative and another and the minister said, gave an order to stop immediately to use the book. And you cannot, it's a system that you cannot do whatever you want. It's a different, and then parents will tell you. So, saying this, there are small islands. Small islands. We have more and more some kind of semi-private schools. Like there are 3 Jewish Arab schools, some democratic schools, so do whatever they want, And then there are some very brave principles that they do what they think, and then I will tell you even more, something maybe sarcastically, that when you see these schools, they serve a good cause, because Israel may say that it's fully democratic, and you look, then you will hear about Zev Dgani, who is in Herzliya. Look, Zev Dgani carries the school, etc., etc. So he becomes a symbol of some kind of pluralism, but there is none, almost. I mean, when you look at the education system, and you talk about million and so children, they are indoctrinated in the system.
Do you want to answer the point about that this person, Jesse, made about the two-state solution not working?
At the moment, in spite of this perception, most of the Israelis would like on a symbolic level this separation and two-state solution, and most of the Palestinians want. So I think the numbers are about 65–70% of the Palestinians and the Israelis, without going into details how it will be done, but as a principle. They want this separation for various reasons. One of the reasons, for me, the formula is the following. If I sometimes am approached, what can you offer? And I say, people have to realize that the costs of continuing occupation are higher when the cost of the compromise for making peace. Did you get the equation?
I do understand that, but
So the point is that Israelis understand that if they continue to the occupation, there will be one state solution, what you are hinting. Israel will, within period of time, will have to decide whether will carry an apartheid state or Palestinians will be the majority and it will be Palestinian state. So everybody understands it. So it's a choice that you have to, within this framework, it's much better to have some kind of solution and divide the state in spite of the fact that you consider it, that it's part of the... Now, why Palestinians go for this is a different story. But they also suffer so much. So I can, they should answer this question. But from the Israeli point of view, this is what I say, the winning argument that moves people like Ulmer, Tzipi Livni, and Sharon from the right position to the some kind of lenient positions and compromising positions. So it's not changing of the world view about the exclusivity of this country, but with regard to how to live here.
Ken wants to come back. Anybody else before we let someone speak twice? Just one person, then we can come.
Yeah, I'm Amelia Cohen. You've mentioned repeatedly in your talk about the cost to Israeli society of this situation, of this hostility and constant war, basically, with the Palestinian people. But you never really spelled out those costs, and I was just curious about it, because I know in other situations that have failed attempt to control Vietnam, the French and Algeria, somebody mentioned, there were really clear-cut costs that went beyond economic costs to the societies, to the aggressor societies. In the United States, there was rampant drug use, there was rampant mental health problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Violence was imported into the society. Violence affected, permeated the police departments and law enforcement, which came directly from torture used in the military context. And I just wondered if stuff like that was going on in Israel,
Yes.
because I get the impression, one gets the impression that, as long as you're an Israeli Jew, it's a fairly enlightened society, it's a fairly kind society. So I just wondered if you could...
So people are aware. There is Simcha Landau, for example, a criminologist at Hebrew University, who writes exactly about these issues. But Israelis don't buy. But, we are on the rise of homicide. One of the biggest problems in Israel is aggression. And it's on the table. Really the Minister of Education is dealing with the problem of aggression, is bullying, etc., very high level. I was asked, giving you an example, when I was in Ministry of Education, I said one of the reasons is, the violence, terrible violence that is going around. At that time, the particular Minister of Education accepted it. But I believe so, that if you will talk with the present Minister of Education, he will not like this answer. So he'll say it's bullshit, it's, there are other reasons. But yes, people talk about a driving level, which is in Israel, it's a Wild West, going to the roads. So Israelis are, right, aggressive, assertive, very much. And obviously the issue of trauma is on at the table. We are the center. Zahava Solomon and Avi Blir. I mean, really many studies showing that people, even if they don't experience through the life, being exposed through the television to violence, become, and then what does it happen to young generation? So you can see, the recent two YouTube stories about, so you had a woman dancing, soldiers dancing in Hebron, and the latest one was the soldier dancing by the woman, right? So those are the small glimpses that the society gets, because there is a lot of it, but then society is very much outraged. How does it happen, But those are the results of occupation, right?
Just a quick comment in terms of car accidents. Under the previous government, the Minister of Transportation, Shaul Mofaz, who was a military general, at one point said, we need to fight car accidents the way we fight terrorism. So the mentality of using the military language, using the entire approach to how we address social problems is so deep into the military way of thinking.
Yeah. At 5 o'clock today, there's going to be a discussion over at Harvard Law School about the one-state, two-state discourse. Some of us don't put those words together, two-state solution, it's state, state, surrender. But again, maybe a similar minor grumble. You have actually addressed the sacred partition plan of 1947. You made some critical comments about how that came about. But I noticed that today...
I did not talk about 47.
The Akiva Elder article, maybe I thought was quoting you on that. In Haaretz.
With regard to what?
Huh?
It's possible, but with regard to what he quoted.
Well, it was a long article.
Yeah,
a lot of your quotes mainly about the victimization thing, but it was also toward the end some discussion of the partition plan. The General Assembly 1947 partition plan.
No, I tell you what. The question was. The question is that Israelis. I know what he quoted me. What we found that Israelis don't know. In other words, again, it's one of these. The war is going on also on narratives. So the story is that the well-accepted narrative in Israel is that here Israel was ready to compromise in 1947 according to the plans that was by UN, but nobody tells you what was the plan. Because the plan, if you find about it, was really, in certain way, from the Palestinian point of view, outraging. Because really, I don't know how many of you here know, but what was the division? The division was that 48% of the there were 1,200,000 Palestinians and 600 Jews. The 600 Jews got 52% of the land, and the 1,200,000 got 48%. So usually when you hear the numbers, you understand why it was rejected. I am asking all the time my students, can you imagine a nation, an ethnic group that would accept such a division? I don't know. Nobody would accept it, in my view, because the division was done on basis of guilt and projection how many Jews will come. But from the point of view of Palestine, so when I ask in this survey that Akiva was quoting, I ask whether you know what was the division, and obviously non-Israeli knew, no of them knew, because it's never spelled out.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for your contributions and discussion, and thank particularly Danny and Shai for the stimulating and as said before, very moving accounts. I think Paul mentioned there is a blog. If you have signed up with your email, you get information. We have a link to the communication site, and we have blogs on it, and there is a blog. Danny wrote a very provocative piece. He replies to it. Please feel free to contribute to the ongoing conversation and to come again some of our seminars. Thank you.
Thank you.